short-sword reproduction for $249. Can't be all that impressive, or can it? Let's take a look at this yataghan. I've looked into the pronunciation, but I've found contradictory statements. Apparently it depends on the language because it was used in different regions. And I can't quite figure out. It might be something like yataghan, but I'm just going to call it yataghan because I'm speaking English right now. It's easier. So this yataghan is from swordbuy.com. They sent it to me for free to review, which generally makes me extra aware of bias, of course. Ironically, in this case, I actually found myself biased against it because when they first reached out to me and asked if I wanted to review it, I looked at the website, swordbuy.com. Sounds awfully generic. And some of the stuff, looking at the pictures, gives off kind of a wall hanger vibe. And then the information is pretty sparse. For example, on this here, it simply says carbon steel. That's kind of a non-statement. So I figured based on my test results, how it performs, and for this kind of blade, I figured it might be either 1060 or 1075 high carbon steel. So I asked them what it is, and they confirmed it is indeed 1060. So 0.6% carbon. That's a good choice for a blade like this. It's one thing to keep in mind is it's not going to have the corrosion resistance of spring steel because it's not a chromium alloy. So it's just plain carbon steel. Nothing wrong with it. You just got to take a little better care of it. All right, so I'm not going to give you a big old comprehensive introduction to the historical background because one, I'm not that familiar with it, and two, it would take too long for a review video that's focused mainly on this particular reproduction. So all I'm going to say is that the sources suggest primarily civilian use for the yataghan, but it was also a sidearm for the Janissaries, which is an Ottoman elite infantry unit. It was popular between the 16th and 19th century, but the design may very well harken back to earlier types. But that's where you get the most recognizable form. What is recognizable about it? Well, for one, the recurve in the blade, the fact that it's single-edged, that it has no guard, and it often has these ears here as the pommel. As far as historical accuracy is concerned, I've compared it to historical originals, and it definitely falls within the general range. There's some variation here and there, of course, but it has all the features you would expect from a yataghan, and it also falls within the general measurements and weight range. It's a bit over half a kilogram, which is quite light, very appropriate for a short sword, and also seems to match the originals generally. The handle is made of goat horn with these aforementioned ears forming the pommel. That's quite useful, not only for retention, so it prevents it from slipping out of your hand, but also, and this is a useful feature for a sidearm, it makes it easier to draw. Because, in the heat of the moment, if your fine motor skills go down, you can just kind of reach for it and pull, and even if you mess it up a little bit, your fingers are going to hit that and you're going to get some purchase on it, and you'll be able to draw it one way or another. It's not finicky at all. You can see the tang here. You can see exactly where it terminates, and it's got two rivets going through. They even shine a little bit through the material, which is quite nice. The strange thing here is the gap where the tang ends and the pommel continues. Functionally, I don't see this as a problem. The tang is as long as it needs to be, but aesthetically it's weird, and every picture of an original yataghan I've seen shows that area being completely filled in. The gap doesn't really bother or concern me as such, and I'm assuming it's simply a cost-saving measure, but it would look better if it was filled in. The handle is very comfortable, and you might think that it's slippery because there's really not much in the way of texture, but not really. The goat horn seems to do a pretty good job, and of course, again, this pommel locks it in place so that's not an issue either way. The shape to me is kind of unusual. It's a little bit different from what I'm used to. It's almost square in cross-section, except that the corners are rounded substantially. Normally I expect a sword handle to be wider than it is thick, which helps with edge alignment. And yeah, I don't feel the edge alignment quite as well on this. Some people, including engineers and physicists, say that the forward curvature should help align it, not in the sense of auto edge alignment where it does everything on its own, but it's supposed to assist you, so the handle shape wouldn't be an issue. Now, personally, I don't feel it. I can't tell that this makes edge alignment any easier due to the curvature. Like, it's a little bit harder because of the shape of the handle. It's not terrible either way. It's neither, exceptionally difficult or exceptionally easy. It's a sword. They all require skill and practice, and they don't do anything just by themselves. Anyway, so moving on to the blade, like I said, it's 1060 carbon steel, and it seems well shaped. You can get a text engraved on the blade, by the way. I preferred it plain. There's one issue I have with this blade, and that is the edge grind. You can probably see it from most angles. There's a very pronounced secondary bevel here. So you have the blade being flat for most of it, and then right here it starts to turn into a very steep, pretty thick edge bevel. It's a steep grind. It is actually sharp. First I thought this wasn't even sharpened properly because of the way it performed on tatami mats, but no, it is in fact sharp. It passes the paper test, and this, by the way, shows you just how meaningless the paper test can be. It also slices pool noodles, and it did quite well on water bottles and other light targets, as long as you get the edge alignment right, of course. So the edge itself, the apex of the edge, is perfectly fine. It is sharp, but as soon as you move on to something more resistant, like soaked tatami mats, either with or without wooden core, it becomes really difficult. How could this be, you might ask? How can a sword be sharp but fail to cut certain targets properly? It has to do with the blade geometry. And that's where this is inaccurate compared to the originals I've seen. The originals seem to have a nice, even, continuous grind from the spine to the edge. It doesn't go flat, hard shoulder, edge grind. And it's a much more gradual edge grind. What that means is that there's way less resistance because it doesn't, as it enters the target, it doesn't hit this shoulder that creates extra resistance that kind of stops and slows it down and makes it more likely to twist and turn. There's one type of cutting that this grind is really good for, cutting corners, because it's quicker, so it saves some money, but otherwise not really desirable. If it's all gradual and even, or like a convex grind, it'll go through the target much more easily. And that, of course, is a bit of a bummer because that takes more time and effort to correct. If it's just the apex of the edge, it's a little bit dull, you can sharpen that, no problem. If it's like this, you got to spend a little bit more time reprofiling it and grinding that, maybe with a slack belt on a belt sander. That would work quite well. That would make this perform way better. And that is particularly important in case of a small, light sword or knife. Some of these were, in fact, more knife-sized, but this is really more of a short sword. That is a problem because you just don't have that much mass. It simply doesn't hit hard enough to get away with a more obtuse, thicker edge that is less prone to damage. And that is a good thing about this. It's definitely not as likely to be damaged, but it's also not going to cut as well, which is important. So what about structural integrity? I wanted to test it in the most realistic way, in the most appropriate way. And because I have another sword from Sword Buy, I tested them one against the other by performing deflections, blocks, and parries. We did those tests with the spine and the flat of the blade because obviously if you clash the edges together, they will be nicked and chipped and all that. And I have to say, I was actually expecting these to fail. I was expecting them to take a set, bend, or otherwise get seriously damaged, maybe even break, but they didn't. So I ramped it up gradually, started out easy, and then we kept hitting them harder and harder, and nothing happened, aside from some chips in the spine, which is to be expected. But it seems like the steel is quite hard, actually, based on that. So very little damage, and otherwise they both prove to be rock solid. Nothing's loosened up, nothing is cracked or anything. The blade is still straight. It's quite impressive, really. And also what I find remarkable is that there was no hand shock at all. Sometimes with various sorts, you've got that where you chop into something or another blade hits it and it's really jarring because the vibrations travel through. But not only does this not vibrate much to begin with, the vibrational node is also here where you hold it. So you really don't feel that, which is great. This is both a cut and a thrust sword, and in fact, according to some sources, the use might have been surprisingly thrust-centric. It's definitely a tip profile that lends itself well to effective thrusts, also because it's a very stiff blade. So yes, this would perform really well in the thrust, and even though you don't have a guard, you do have the shoulder here of the blade, so it's going to prevent your hand from riding up on it. So yeah, you can definitely thrust effectively with this. And the handling is great. You can throw cuts very quickly and easily, even though I do feel that when I go fast, it's pretty difficult to maintain edge alignment. It's not balanced very close to the handle, and you wouldn't want that because this is a light sword either way. So you want to give it as much blade presence as possible for effective cuts, without being clunky, which it absolutely isn't. The finish is pretty good, and in fact, for the price range, it's very good, in my opinion. There's really nothing in the way of tool marks, and the fit is surprisingly good, especially in this price range. There's no gap at all, and I can tell that they didn't just fill it in with glue either. They clearly fitted the parts with care, so they fit together seamlessly without needing to fill anything. And I apologize, I don't know why my voice keeps cracking today, but it is what it is. On the website, it's shown with a sheath or scabbard, but I didn't get one, so I can't make any statements about that. So overall, this really surprised me. In this price range from such a generic sounding store, and no offense, guys, but that's just how it comes across. This is really surprisingly good. Yeah, as I said, I started out biased against it actually, but it convinced me. And I haven't seen much for $250 that's this well made, so I can easily recommend it. If you're interested in the Yatagan, the link will be down below. And also, watch out for the next video where I'm going to review their killage, which I actually like more than this. So make sure to do all of the usual crap, hitting the bell and blah, whatever, so you see it, because a lot of people keep telling me that they're subscribed but don't see my uploads. So you can try that. Maybe it helps. Probably won't. Whatever. Thanks for watching. Have a good one and take care. Hope you found this helpful.